Welcome to the Digging Deeper podcast, brought to you by New Hope Church. My name is Matt, and I'm so very excited to dive into today's topic. Before we get there, though, I'm really excited to see how these guys are doing, because they've been in the podcast forever. So, Nate, how you doing, buddy?
I'm doing great, feeling blessed, feeling the pressure as you return to the chaos.
Yes, that's right. That's right.
Said to Allie the other day, it's hard, especially coming back to have to do political campaigning. It's hard not to come back and get jaded so quickly when lose the joy and the perspective. So I'm glad we're revisiting that in this podcast because I need it too. So, but no, just feeling blessed and really missed my family, obviously, but my church family big time too.
Yeah.
And so it's so nice to come back and worship together.
Absolutely. Yeah. Jay, how you doing, buddy?
I'm doing really, really good, man. Super joyous and rested, feeling really, really good. Definitely had an amazing sabbatical and feel like I'm coming back just pumped and yes, also feeling a little bit of that like hokoi. There's lots to do, lots of needs, lots of things going on.
Yeah.
But still definitely have a heart of joy towards it. So doing really good. But
That's
as
awesome.
Nate said, distance makes the heart grow fonder. We so missed being in our church with our church people, and worshiping together and the energy and the faith and the just amazing community that we have. Holy moly, did we ever miss that?
Yeah.
So it was so good to come back.
Yeah, it's funny, when you guys were gone, like you do your best to kind of fill in when you guys are gone, and you guys were definitely missed for that reason because you guys covered so many things and knew so many things. But it was funny because what I observed when you were gone is there was a dynamic to our team that was missing. Like it was like,
You're probably a lot more efficient.
Well, I don't know about that. No, but it's like when it's like when your brother or sister goes off to college, right? Your family just doesn't feel the same. And then they come home for like Christmas holiday and it's like, oh, this is good. That's what it felt like while you guys were gone and then coming back. So glad you guys are home. Good to have you back.
So good
Thanks,
to be
man.
back.
Good. So, so I want to actually spend today's podcast unpacking a little bit of your sabbatical. And I thought a really fun place to start, because I know when we went to Israel, there were a lot of interesting things that we saw that were going, I never would have thought of that, or I've never would have seen that. So the first question I want to ask you guys in like 2 minutes or less, is to the best of your ability, what are some of the biggest highlights when you traveled? I mean, like specifically fun or just weird things you experienced that you've never experienced before. What kind of stands out to you guys off the top of your head? Nate, why don't you go ahead, buddy?
Hard to narrow it down, AJ. That's a tough one. I think what some of the cool spots was we rented scooters in Tel Aviv and went to like a market. That was just hilarious because it's Jay, Phoebe, Nate, and Allie trying to rent scooters in another country.
And it took a long time.
We wasted some shekels. That was hilarious. Crazy stuff about the war and like the battles and like driving past minefields that have big warning signs, like don't go into this minefield between Lebanon and them. And yeah, it was kind of crazy. We went into the biggest dive of a shawarma house the first day we were there and had the best shawarma of the whole trip.
Oh, there you go.
Who would have thought?
Yeah.
But one of the really cool nights we were in Tiberias, and we were staying like right on the Sea of Galilee, and our guide goes, "Who wants to go on a power walk?" And he comes out in full running gear, and we're like, "Oh!" And then he starts running, and like Phoebe's wearing Birkenstocks, like so now we're like trying to catch up to him, like jog behind him, and we've climbed up the mountain behind us into the ruins of Herod Antipas's like mansion, and it was just it was like undiscovered kind of. They just stopped excavating, so you're just in the middle of these ruins, but there's no plaques, no signs, and then there's a YWAMer group right beside the ruins worshiping. So then we just went and joined them and worshiped with them at these ruins. And it was just a kind of a surreal kind of night. It was pretty cool.
So cool. That's awesome. Jay.
Oh man, so many fun things. Some crazy annoying things were like some of our traveling, there was a lot of coughing on the flights and a lot of, we're just like, oh my gosh, babe, hope we don't get sick. I hope we don't get sick. Thank the Lord in heaven, we never got sick.
Amen.
That's right.
The scooter thing was hilarious because we didn't realize, I think Nate mostly didn't realize that there's actually kind of laws or like guidelines for them.
Yeah.
So at one point, as we're like driving these scooters with both little like scooters with our wives on them, Nate veered off the actual path to like the normal sidewalk.
Like along the beach. It was beautiful.
Yeah, and immediately got pulled over by the police.
Cops like on motorcycles just rip over in front of me and they're yelling at me in Hebrew. I'm like, I don't know what I'm doing.
So that was awesome. That was a fun one.
Yeah.
I was shocked in Tel Aviv. We wake up at like 6 a.m. or 5:30 and there's all kinds of people on the beach playing volleyball, working out. And I was like, holy, there are gamers out there. That was really fun. Another time that was a specialty, not necessarily not a power walk, but just a special night where he took us. He just discovered this like abandoned museum on this random
All right.
Anglican seminary.
Yeah.
And we're like, where did this guy? And he showed us the oldest candelabra in the world.
Man.
So like that was unbelievable.
Yeah.
Like how is this not in a legit museum or like people are paying to see this? Like he would do some stuff like that. Like the Herod's amphitheater was like that. The Dead Sea was quite shocking,
isn't it?
And
though,
like
it's the weirdest thing.
you know, you're walking into the water, and all of a sudden you're not trying to float, but your feet just start giving way.
Yeah.
And the next thing you know, you're floating. It's like,
This is true.
like Nate, I've never floated a day in my life, so that was special.
That
was
good.
special.
Oh, that's awesome. It sounds like so many good times there. You know, and Israel as a whole is a pretty amazing thing just
You've
to
been.
experience. I have, and it is it gives you pause. And I know for me there was a lot of wow moments and moments that kind of make you just stop and just experience God in a new way, maybe, or give you perspective that you've never had. And I wanted to ask you guys about that. Like, were there moments? You know, I know for myself, the Sea of Galilee was one of those where there was just this moment of realization that Jesus walked on this water.
Mm-hmm.
And it just was a moment of like, I had no other choice but to worship because I'm going like, God, you are insane. Like this just blows my mind that this is what it was like. Did you guys have those? Like, what were those experiences for you? Maybe just share one or a couple of those wow moments. Jay, you're smiling. Go for it, buddy.
Well, there were so many wow moments. One, I'll say two quick ones.
Yeah.
One, like profound, personal, like between me and Jesus moment was definitely in one of the sites that's considered the Garden of Gethsemane.
Mm-hmm.
And this is the one it's still like a garden of trees, and it's not, they haven't built a church on this one. And we're sitting there, one of the pastors who was with us shared a message, like a short, brief reflection, and we got to walk off and just kind of spend some quiet time with the Lord. And I just kind of sat on this rock, you know, and I thought, and just looked at the ground, and I was like, Jesus was here in this space.
Yeah.
Sweat blood, because he's so just in emotional turmoil. He's about to go to the cross, and for the joy set before him, he did it. Like he went.
Yeah.
And I just really felt the realness of that moment, more so than maybe ever before. I don't know. But the fact that he was here, he did this for me, for the whole cosmos, for the people I love, for the people in my church. And it was right here. And you know, of course, I took some stones from there to remember it by. So that was a huge one. The other big one I'll say for me is because I love the Book of Acts, as you guys know, and you tease me about. One of the passages that I am always talking about with my life group leaders, who I do when I do orientation with them, is Acts chapter 2, where 3,000 people are literally baptized in one day. Yeah, and then it's the church in many respects is kind of birthed there, and. You know, you never really think, how did they do 3,000 baptisms? Like in this place, like what did that look like? Well, as you look off the back steps of the Temple Mount, there's all these ritual cleansing baths. And we're like, oh my gosh, like this is probably where it happened.
Yeah.
Like, the church was birthed here. 3,000 baptisms in one day right here. And so that was so cool. That was super cool, man.
That's amazing.
Yeah, I think I got a lot of time to reflect on how patient our God is with me, but with like humanity, with His creation.
Yeah.
As someone who lacks patience, I was maybe more blown away with that each time, and even, you know, whether it's the way Jesus interacted with His disciples when they're rascals and yet so patient, or just over time in history. So. That was an interesting one. Patience and peace was also a word that kept coming to mind because we went to all these spots and we're on the sea. That day we were on the sea. They moved our day up and we're like, oh, why are we on the Sea of Galilee today? And so we're worshiping. It's just calm and beautiful and the sun is shining. It's an amazing day. And then all of a sudden the next day we got to see the raging sea, which is not a very big. It's like a lake.
Yeah, it is.
You know,
it's basically a lake. Yeah,
and you see it, and the waves are massive, and you're going like. This is the peace be still. It wasn't even a storm, but like this is the the peace moment. So lots of cool moments where he's recognizing peace, and one of them would have been certainly when we were near the caves where David would have been, and there's a water or the Iliad River there, right? Am I saying that right? running right there, and we're sitting there, and I stood the entire time.
It's a little waterfall. Yeah.
I stood the entire time in the water at the waterfall with my shoes off, and I was just like, "This is the we leave beside still waters verse and the peace moment of that." So that was a word that kept coming up in my head, in my heart, and then I would say the only other one that was just wow was a wow of kind of almost similar disgust, which I mentioned briefly on Sunday, was Masada, like going there, recognizing it, looking out where the Romans would have been coming at them, charging at them, looking at, and just, sorrow, sadness, like just a reality that we can't be slaves. We'll instead die on our sword. And wow, like the historical moment. And I'm not sure I've fully processed all the emotion I felt that day still today. So
I want to kind of lean into that a bit, because you're talking about some of the things you've kind of gleaned and taken from. And I know, Nate, you preached obviously last Sunday on some of that, and Jay, you're preaching this Sunday, so I don't want to ruin any spoilers. But what were some of the takeaways from that, and how are you trying to like navigate and work those into your everyday now? Because I don't think you come away from a trip like that and not go, oh shoot, I need to feed some things in or apply some things in my life. What are some of those ones for you guys that stand out right now?
I mean, there was lots. A couple things I'll say. One thing is just kind of speed. As you're there and you see the land and you're walking on the land and you're seeing how mountainous the land is, how sometimes desert the land is, but you see like they would have done so much walking and talking, and it makes so much sense that the early church called themselves the Way.
Yeah.
They're always walking, and everything would have been pretty much at a walking speed.
Yeah.
And I feel like so much of my life, so much of modern life is fast. It's demanding. You got to do it now. You got to do it now. And when you're speeding up so much, sometimes it's easy to miss those times where you just get to walk and talk. And discipleship's, there's a speed to discipleship. And sometimes we think people should change fast, change everything now. Yeah. As a person who's a pastor, and you're trying to help people change, literally, that's almost the main part of my job.
Yeah.
We think it's supposed to happen so fast.
Mm-hmm.
And the disciples had 3 years to walk with Jesus on this land, and they still didn't get it after 3 years with Jesus.
Yeah.
And so for me, some of the takeaways was like, okay, there's parts of my life I feel like I need to, and thinking that I think needs to slow down because it makes me an impatient person. It makes me not as loving and merciful of a person. And I expect something inhuman from other people. And I don't think that's right. So speed was a big thing. Rest was a major thing for me, and Sabbath. I mean, that's literally what I'm going to preach on this Sunday, is the importance of Sabbath, and how I feel like I've done not a wonderful job of that personally. Like it's not that I haven't taken days off, yes, but there's a difference between taking a day off and Sabbathing well.
Yeah.
I don't know I don't think my kids up until recently really even understood what the heck a Sabbath was, and so wanting to teach them that. And then also, a big thing was a book I was reading while on this sabbatical was a book called You're Only Human. And the subtitle is something along the lines of God designed you with limits.
Yeah.
And that's good news. And realizing that sometimes I think we maybe without knowing sometimes, maybe with knowing, we put ourselves in the divine's shoes. Expect divine capacity out of ourselves. And think to have limits is sinful, when actually we're human beings. We have limits and capacities. It's not sinful. That's just how God had made you. And to try to actually supersede those limits is actually what's sinful and idolatrous. And so trying to learn what does that actually mean tangibly, how to apply that, how to be okay with not being able to solve everyone's problem or have an answer to every single question. Like that's been very freeing for me and necessary. A necessary correction. Like I've always believed that, but it
makes me think of the idea as you're talking, like this idea that we desire God's power. Like we want God's power, we want it. And that was actually the original sin, like desiring God's power. Yeah.
That's right.
And yet we think that's what it means to be Christian, to be holy. We desire God's power, then we can do these miracles. And actually God hasn't told us that we'll have his power. We have access to it, but we have limitations. And living in that means that we live in a funny tension in the midst of it and have to therefore accept our limitations, but also understand we have access to the power of God, the Holy Spirit. Like that's huge. That's huge stuff.
Yeah, the other thing that recognizing your limits causes you to do is recognize that there's an entire body of Christ that is at
that's right.
our fingertips and that should be mobilized and allowed to flourish and allowed to use their gifts and talents. And so when you recognize your own limits, it forces you to recognize the gifts and talents of those around you that God is trying to mobilize and use for his kingdom work. So all that stuff, man.
Absolutely.
Ecclesiastes 1:9 says, what has been will be again, what has been done will be done again. There is nothing new under the sun. And I recall that drive-in service playing that song, you know, and spending time in that text. And yet there I was looking back on centuries of history and going, there's nothing new, man. Like the same sins ravage me and us today. Like, and I think like to think that we've arrived, you know, where what did Sarah calls once like an arrogance, a timeline arrogance in us that go because we have Google, we're better, and it's like the same thing. So that was a bit of a sobering reality, but also makes the scriptures makes you realize when you read any part of the scripture, it's got the direct application to where we're in yet again, and Jesus being the pinnacle and not falling into religion, but just refocusing myself, my teaching, my words, my meetings that I hold, all on the gospel, on Jesus, was a convicting moment of going like, I still think like if there's a good system and a good process and we work really hard, and yet I just went like, I just need people to know Jesus, because I watched religion there and I just went, man, Jesus needs to be the pinnacle. Jay's comment of walking, I go, they walked together. Almost they walked together in it. And so just realizing lastly that we were a sent people, whether it was the feed my sheep, but following Israel, we actually went to Rome, we went to Italy and Barcelona, and realizing the church, like the sent people, whether we literally was where Peter was sent, and then going into some of these places and going like, oh my gosh, like we've always been, since Jesus came, we've been a sent people. And arguably the Old Testament journeys were what they did. They wandered through the desert. They didn't just sit. They wandered through. So we are a sent people, and I'm just thankful that we get to walk together.
Speaking of that piece of, you know, you get to see other cultures and how they do things and stuff like that. Can you share a little bit on what it was like to actually see how another culture has responded or not responded to God in that call? And maybe in that kind of answer, you know, what have you guys gleaned from that cross-cultural experience that either gives you new or refreshed or a deeper perspective on the mission we have here, you know, and how we are going to engage here based on that? Because cross-cultural experiences have a tendency to do that, right? They give us a different perspective or maybe a broader perspective. But what was that like for you guys? Did you kind of make note of anything or anything that just even challenged the way that we look at the mission and how we engage? Your guys' thoughts on that? That was a big question. So.
Yeah. No, I'll just reiterate,
please.
Maybe I won't say too much more on this. I'll just say, you know, the focus on Jesus came out of watching their culture, actually. Like, the culture is divided. They believe battling and war and fighting is their mandate. And I go, Jesus changed all that for almost all of us, that he fights our battles. We believe that he is a living God, a living hope. And it's just that pinnacle of Jesus in our faith, in our days, how we see life today, how we live together in a community and in this world. It was because of Jesus. And that pinnacle of our faith, it really, we live different, and I would say much more free, joy-filled lives because of our hope in Jesus.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I'll say two things, I think. One's a positive, one's a negative. So I'll say the positive first. You know, when you go to a place like Israel, you see intense devotion from Muslims to their thoughts of what religion or faithfulness looks like. Just intense devotion, you know, like, cover your shoulders, cover your feet, like just very intense. And behind that is a intense devotion. Same thing with some of the ultra-Orthodox or even some of the Jewish communities that we found, like just deep devotion to what they think is faithfulness. And it's on both sides, it's extremely religious, as you just said. It's not very freeing. It's do these things, these specific acts, pray this way, say these words, protect this thing and protect that thing. And it's like crazy devotion. And in one sense, there's a negative to that, which I'll talk about, but the positive is, man, these people are seriously devoted to what they think is good, right, and true. And for me, sometimes I wonder, like, how lazy am I? Am I truly devoted to some of the teachings of the Scripture, to Jesus, and to what He's called me to? And so it elevated my sense of what counts as devotion.
Yeah.
And what counts as like, oh, that's a nice idea, or I'm a fan, you know. On the other side, man, it seemed to me like they don't talk to each other. Like the difference, the people who operate in these different, and even just secular people talking to religion, you just don't see much. I didn't see much like civil dialogue.
Yeah.
You know, I saw a lot of tense, like Nate showed a picture on Sunday of like just this young, very like non-threatening Jewish family just wanted to walk through the temple area, and he's surrounded by 6 military officers. Like, whoa.
Yeah.
What do you think they're going to do? Pull him like something out of the crib? I don't know. Like, holy moly. Nate did a great job sharing about that, but it's just this inability to talk to one another. You know, and it's like, man, we got to learn here too, especially how to talk to each other. And especially when we have major disagreements, how can we just start the conversation? You can't fix a problem if you can't even talk about it, whether that's in your marriage, whether that's in a cultural issue, whether that's a church issue. We got to learn how to talk to each other.
Yeah.
So those were 2 big ones for me.
Yeah, no, it's good. One of the questions that I always wonder when people come back from either mission trips or a trip like this is, you know, how are you going to keep the things you've gleaned or learned fresh as you get back into normal, right? Like, how do you, what are the practices you're putting in place so that those things you learned while you're away stay fresh for you? What does that look like?
Yeah, I mean, well, there's one very practical one I'll share, but the other one is really trying to, often maybe in my devotions, I'll run right to most of my New Testament letters again. And I don't know why I'm all like, as we were studying, you know, 1 Timothy, like I've been there. I read that quite a bit, you know?
Yeah.
And yet when I was there, the Old Testament came in a cool new way to go, yeah, man, I got to spend more time in the Word, in studying the Old Testament, understanding the battle of Elisha. Like I've never really reflected and sat on that for a very long period of time. So that's a cool moment for my personal devotion life. But I think the other thing I had to ask as we walked into all these places that were used to be massive buildings and are now ruins that then got built upon again, that are ruins again. Then that got built and they're ruins. Even Masada, like what a structure. They were carting water up to the top of the mountain every day so this guy could have a massive bath. You know, like, and I'm sitting in these places going like, what are we building for here?
Yeah.
You know, like, do we have the right perspective that this is going to crumble? But like the real thing we're building is on for lives and souls for eternity. So good. Like, does Jesus permeate our building project, or are we, you know, Herod the Great trying to build another palace? Like, and I know we're not there, but I thought it was just a good self check as we go to committee and go to all these different things, and I just went, I'm doing this for the kingdom. Yeah. I don't even want the building. It's going to crumble. It's going to rust. It's going to fall in. The roof will leak. Like my kids aren't going to be around probably. Like my grandkids probably won't see the same building I see, right? Yeah. But will they know Jesus? And is that what we're building? And just kind of a new resolve and new focus in the midst of a building project, which I think was a word from God for me.
That's so good. Thanks, man.
Yeah, for me, a big thing which I'm preaching on this Sunday is Sabbath. You know, Sabbath, like an actual day, but then also just like a lifestyle of resting in God. Not rest as in the sense, no work's not good. No, but just like a posture of my heart and my being in Christ. Not being in a rush all the time. So definitely I'm putting new practices in when it comes to like a full day of Sabbath and trying to protect that and teach my kids about it, doing it as a family. We didn't really Sabbath as a family in the past. And I want to do that as a family. Yeah. So that's will be something new for us. You know, it's just challenging as a pastor when Sunday can't be your Sabbath because you're working all day. Yeah. So you and your kids you kind of want your kids to have Sabbath on Sunday, but you're not Sabbathing on Sunday. So trying to find a happy medium of maybe Sabbath for us is a different day and protecting that. What does that look like? How do we guard that? So that'll be a big thing for me. And then just a rejuvenation of my own personal quiet times and how to slow myself down, not to not work hard, but to hear and see what God is doing. Yeah. I do not ever want to rush past God in any meeting, in any initiative, in anything. And I feel the effects of the modern world. I feel the distraction of my phone. I feel the distraction of all kinds of things and not being able to focus sometimes. And so just trying to think of all the different practices that I can put into my weekly schedule and family schedule, where I'm forcing myself to slow down and listen to God, not try to get ahead of God.
Yeah.
Not just for other people, but just for the health of my own soul. Just taking responsibility for the health of my own soul. I just feel energized and a bigger desire to just really do that. And partly because a question I was asking myself going into my sabbatical was, what do I need to do? What do I need to change in order to have a healthy, sustainable family and life on mission, life in ministry, life for the kingdom, life serving others for the rest of my life?
Yeah.
So that was the guiding question. And so just trying to put all kinds of safeguards, practices, rhythms in place so that can actually really happen.
Yeah. That's awesome, guys. Thank you for sharing today. Really appreciate it. It's really good to have you guys back. Not gonna lie.
So good to be back.
So good.
So good.
So good. To our listeners, thank you so much for joining us on the podcast. As if this is the first podcast you're hearing, or if you're new to New Hope, we encourage you to jump on our website or app and fill that Connect card, because we'd love to connect with you. We'll talk to you next time on Digging Deep.